Now with AI, it's not a tech issue, it's an adoption issue. I'm a little bit concerned personally about the ambition level.
Because now you can do an analysis on the fly.
A simple answer is often the best one. Actually getting to know people, understand what drives them, be reflective on what takes energy, what brings energy.
What would be a future fit, brave leadership?
So I think you have to embrace that this is going to change super fast.
Welcome to Northern Lights podcast, Frithjof Lund. We're very excited to have you here. We're at House 21 for this production, and we're proud to be partnered with House 21. So you are this McKinsey superstar that everybody wants to talk to right now because the world is in turmoil, so much is happening, and they need your clients, and everybody else would like to listen to people like you. Currently, you're heading up the global board service for McKinsey and also the organization practice in Scandinavia. And of course, AI and what that implies for brave leadership is top of mind for you and for the company worldwide. And I think in our conversation, we will delve into various impacts of the AI revolution and this chaotic and conflicted business environments that leaders are facing. But we want to get to know you first, so maybe we can kind of start it at a soft note. What is it that made you choose to go to McKinsey in the first place?
That's a good question, actually, because as you say, I also studied quite a few different subjects. I started actually studying psychology for a year, and then I spent a couple of years in the armed forces, then started law school, studied a bit more psychology while I was in law school, organizational psychology, and then I was like this long-timer student. I was finished at law school when I was 27.
You weren't this so competitive at that time.
It wasn't about being competitive or not. For me, I think it was more, I was interested in a lot of different things.
But one thing I noted as you started telling your story now is this psychology path that you were testing out. As I read you as a McKinsey consultant, you've always had that touch of psychology, which is not what we typically refer to with McKinsey.
Yeah, at the same time, and we can talk a bit about that, I think what people typically refer to as McKinsey, when you're on the inside, I don't really know what that is almost, because we have people with all different backgrounds in McKinsey. But I think maybe not that many psychologists, but we've had that as well. I actually hadn't heard about McKinsey until I was like a year or two before I started, because McKinsey was never visible at law school. I mean, nobody thought about.
Oh, but they were a secret to many, but they did hard work.
Yeah. But then I remember actually doing some of this, studying some organizational psychology. We came across McKinsey, and I just understood that they were working on a wide variety of topics. I never had any sort of business background, or I didn't come from a family that sort of had. My father is a professor in chemistry, and my mother was a teacher. We were never like brought up into a business.
But then you've used that background. We're going to touch upon the other capacities you have as well, of course. But this psychology element has been very relevant for the development with the clients that you work with and with organizations. But as I recall, a few years ago, McKinsey was less interested in that. And you were, I don't know if you were controversial, but you had much more focus on organizations, leadership, and the psychological elements of that than many others in McKinsey. How did your background kind of help you into seeing what is needed now in leadership and in strategy development?
Yeah, I think we have probably, I mean, this has been a gradual change in McKinsey, and I think globally in McKinsey for the last 20 years, but I still remember when I started with that background, we had the organization practice, but that was still, we still very much came from the roots in strategy, and maybe what we, strategy, corporate finance, a bit what we sometimes called the hard stuff, and then it was the soft stuff.
Exactly.
Was sort of the more organizational psychology and leadership development, etc. I think that started already 20 years ago. So I wouldn't say I'm such a different animal in the McKinsey zoo, but I still think over the years, I mean, that has become a much more central part of what we do in McKinsey, and I think ultimately, again, we can talk more about it, but we have this concept of performance and health, where performance is typically the hard stuff.
That's the hardcore, and you can measure everything.
How you measure things, and then health, we mean the organizational health, the underlying, I mean, the culture, the capabilities, the leadership, the talent bench in the companies. And I think over the years, we've sort of pivoted to at least, or maybe a pivot is too far, but the pendulum has become much more balanced between the two in McKinsey.
So I would make the statement that as we look into the future of leadership, and with all of these transformational changes that are happening in business environment, with all the conflicts that are around companies, and with artificial intelligence being more and more integrated into business, that focus becomes more and more important, and it would touch upon the human side of leadership. So what do you think about that? If you look back a few years on how you used to work and how you now work with clients, how that has changed?
Yeah, I think some things have changed. Some things have remained constant, I would say, because it is often a bit of a misunderstanding, and that was a misunderstanding, in my opinion, even 20 years ago, which was, McKinsey only developed, a PowerPoint, and that's the only product. If I'm sort of blunt, that was never, I mean, yes, it's one of the outputs of a strategy exercise or whatever focus it is, but I think what we have always brought is the anchoring with management, with leadership, the anchoring with the board and the owners, the anchoring in the organization more broadly, the plan to do that. I think the capability building of really understanding what are some of the strategic choices, etc. So part of that has always been important for McKinsey in our work. At the same time, I think, as you say now with AI, what we see very clearly, and every consultant will tell you the same, I mean, this is not a tech, reaping the benefits of AI in a business, it's not a tech issue. I mean, the technology is there, it's an adoption issue, and the adoption requires management conviction. It requires a CEO who is aspirational and who sets direction. It requires building the capabilities and changing the capabilities in the organization. It requires change management and culture change in terms of how the organization works and reinvents itself. And I think all of these topics, they are not, again, there are strategic questions, obviously. There are questions around, what tangible value will come, and there are technological and data platform, etc., and data availability questions. But the main reason why people don't get the benefits are due to the soft factors. So I think, again, back to your leadership point, you will have to bring the understanding of how you sort of navigate and get people along.
So let's break that down a little bit. So for the audiences, just as a little reminder of your background, you've also been the past 6 years, you've actually been the managing partner of Norway for McKinsey, which means that you've been in that CEO role yourself, and then you are at the expert frontier of strategy development, organization development, and you work with bigger industries and corporations, and also private equity. And you've sometimes said that AI is not, like you kind of into now, is not about technology so much as it is about leadership. So my question is, what is it that leaderships miss? What are the questions they don't ask? What are their blind spots in this field?
I think maybe the first reflection, and that's maybe a little bit of a reflection on Norway, if I'm honest, if I contrast that to quite a few other countries, I'm a little bit concerned personally about the ambition level we have amongst the leaders or many leaders in Norway on AI. I think it's changing, but I think if we look back the last 2 years, we actually see the aspiration level for how we can fundamentally almost rewire our organization or really fundamentally take the opportunities and mitigate the risks, but really having an aspirational mindset. We see that less in Norway than we see in some other countries.
Are we still too complacent?
The question is, I mean, it can be part of that. It can be part of our almost incentives, and I'm not only talking about monetary incentives, but we want to have to live a comfortable life, and I think to some extent maybe we've been a little bit also burnt by the past because we've been early on digitization, and maybe that it didn't sort of fully deliver on the promises historically. But
what does that mean? Does it mean that companies wasted a lot of money because they were early movers, or what are you saying?
To some extent, that might be the case. Again, I wouldn't say, I mean, that we don't have a clear fact base, but there is something in Norway which is slightly different from some other countries. I mean, we see typically, even in Denmark. I mean,
because you work with Scandinavia. So what's the difference between Norway, Sweden, and Denmark?
I would say that we see, if I just take McKinsey as a temperature measurement of temperature, we do see more let's say aspirational plans, really jumping into AI, really understanding where will the value come from, really starting to change the way you're working, end-to-end workflows, redesigning processes more fundamentally. I think in Norway we definitely see the curiosity. We see less of the really jumping into it. And then again, I'll just be nuanced. It's not like that is for everyone.
No, but how do you kind of nurture their sentiment to be more on it, if that's what you're saying? How can you, as consultants, as McKinsey, enable top management, leadership groups, and even upcoming workforce students to be more on it, if we can put it that way?
First of all, I think that's part of our mission almost, and purpose is really lifting the aspiration levels. I think that is important, not only on AI, it's on competitiveness more broadly. Right now, AI is a big driver of that. Again, I think part of that is what all consultants do, but what I think McKinsey does, I personally think we do that the best in the world, is really cross-fertilize, really bringing the frontier insights from all parts of the world and all sectors and bringing that to our clients. So it's showing the art of the possible, what is actually possible. That's part of it. I think this...
And you use it with clients. You use AI tools, you use AI analytics with clients all the time.
Yeah, both in terms, I mean, we, again, we can talk about how we leverage AI and rewire our own processes in McKinsey, but of course, we both advise our clients on how they can get the benefits from AI. And of course, we adopt it ourselves. Mm-hmm. And for me, I mean, if I think about McKinsey, I think it's... I think it has it's an enormous opportunity for McKinsey, and I'm quite optimistic on the need for advisors, I would say, and especially advisors
because
like
that's
us.
Interesting, because the metaphor, you actually mention it yourself with these 100 pages heavy PowerPoints that have been delivered myself up through the years from McKinsey, and now AI agents or AI tools can spit out these analyses in no time. Isn't that even a threat, do you think, to consultancy?
this is the question I get a lot from from students or new employees or other everyone or many are asking the same question. Will McKinsey even exist? Isn't that first of all? I think that's part of it is a misunderstanding of what is it that
what you actually do.
We do. It's never been about just the PowerPoint, but that's just one part of it. Obviously, it fundamentally changes how we work, because when I started 22 years ago, I spent a lot of time if we were doing an acquisition or supporting an acquisition, and we did what is called the due diligence, understanding the market and the competition. You would do a lot of primary research. You would do, you would check every available resource to find numbers. You would make Excel sheets, etc. You would spend a lot of time on that. That is now done literally in the first hour.
And you trust that, right?
We will quality assure it, and I think that's part of what we also bring is the critical sort of challenge. We bring the subject matter expertise who has the sort of knowledge and the depth to challenge that. So that is always important. But your starting point is just so much higher than we had historically. But that again, so when I say it's an opportunity for McKinsey, I think a lot of this more, I would almost say, time waste we can now spend on
the more trivial work,
building upon a much better starting point, and then spending that time also debating the real strategic.
But that's also been like an investment case for McKinsey. So I remember from my practices in corporations and at executive level, I had the privilege to participate in some of these McKinsey facilitated summits for CFOs and CEOs. And it's not that many years ago, you were proud to say that you have brought in data scientists. You even showed them to us, and we had to kind of do some AI work ourselves.
I remember that.
You remember that, right? And that was new. And then I remember you and others from McKinsey said, we also have to go through a huge change in order to be adaptive to what's coming. So you do confirm that this has also been challenging to you, like it is to any other company.
Of course, and that's why I say I think it's a big opportunity for us. At the same time, if we are not remaining at the frontier, I used to say ahead of the curve. I actually think it's hard to be ahead of the curve right now.
Who's ahead of the curve?
Who's ahead of the curve? So, but we have to be at the very frontier and be able to leverage, the frontier insights globally. But if we don't do that, I think it's a huge risk.
Yeah. So it's a race for AI, and it's a race for AI first globally, and big tech is way ahead. But let's keep talking a little bit more about this, which is kind of also the daily business life. Now, at the management level, so you've been like the managing partner CEO for McKinsey for 6 years. What lessons have you learned? And on the note of AI, would a person like you be replaceable by an agent? Like, could we have an AI Frithjof agent doing many parts of that work? That's also a part of the discussion. Do we really need these CEOs and managers?
First of all, I do hope that I will have a sort of a sidekick agent, and many already have that. Yes, as a sidekick, and a colleague of mine, he has his own sort of personal setup agent.
What would his name be?
He puts to work when he goes to bed every evening, and I think many of the listeners will probably already have that. And this is not about exploring agents, but really have a bit more heavy setup agent.
You wouldn't mind?
No, that I wouldn't mind. And he puts his agents to work every night before he goes to bed for the stuff that he wants to be done by next morning. I think that is a supervision.
And that could even be a she.
That
right?
could be a she.
There's a lot of men in McKinsey.
I think, but again, will that replace the need for trusted advice, the need for actually helping change the ways of working, change the mindsets, behaviors of your employees, of the organization, of your leadership team, and guide through some of the changes that we need. That I don't think will be
so you need
replaced
both.
by. You need both.
You need both.
Yeah.
Does it mean that we all have to work much harder? Will we reach more productivity, or what is the actual win and gain?
You could say, I would say to some extent the contrary, but I think this is where, I mean, the big question is, will we work a lot less? I mean, there's a lot of, you probably read all the memos and the counter memos on the Citrine research and what will happen. Will we have mass sort of unemployment going forward? That might be, that's at least a scenario. I think, again, as many are saying, you know, the past sort of technological or industrialization and the age of the internet, etc., that actually created more jobs. So personally, I think that's more sort of viable, that there will be more opportunities coming out of this.
So how will that play out? We know that even the big tech companies are down manning, they are restructuring. Companies like Amazon, Google, Cisco, all of these who really are into tech are also down manning because they don't need all the workforce anymore. So what is it that you're actually saying is that maybe for a period there will be some jobs will be lost, but then new jobs will be created?
At least that is what historically has been the case. And then, of course, as you say, will the timing, I mean, will there be, and again, just to be clear, I don't think anyone really knows this. So this is not, you know, this is my personal view. This is not like a McKinsey specific view. But again, that's what history has shown us. Now the question is, of course, you know, will that be the case going forward? But if we take Norway specifically, again, we have a deficit of, you know, people into the healthcare industry, given the demographic changes of Norway going forward. I mean, that will free up. Hopefully, we will also get ample time and productivity freed up in the healthcare industry in itself. But that will free up more time for personal handling, and what we have seen, and I don't think we know all the new potential occupations, but again, playing in a podcast, that wasn't a something that was done 20 years ago.
I'll tell you it was. I'll tell you it was, because that is what I find a little bizarre and funny myself, since I originally came from the media industry. We did this. We did radio.
You did radio.
We did radio.
Yeah, you could always say.
Big time. Yeah. We did TV and radio and all of.
But I think
all
you
of
have
this,
more channels.
You
have more channels than you had.
So this is something you could tell me about, because now we can do an analysis on the fly. So yes, we did that. We had that, and now we have all kinds of channels. That is true, and all kinds of institution, organizations, and individuals producing all of this. So the competition. You know, the marketplace has changed fundamentally. How will that play? Do you believe in small players, or is it all about the big players?
It's a very interesting question. We have, as you probably read about, someone calls the software as a service apocalypse going on now. That's maybe taking it a bit too far, but you had quite a few due to AI and some of these, let's say, scenarios going forward that has impacted also the valuation of software as a service companies. And one of the things which are also emphasized in that is that, you know, when the barriers to entry for a SaaS company, as an example, goes close to zero, because you can code up, you know, the actual software, you get a lot of players. But what happens when you get a lot of players? You get a lot of noise, and what then happens is you have a flight to trust. You have a flight to the larger players, typically, when you get a lot of other, I mean, a very let's say fragmented landscape. And you could also foresee, you know, in the media landscape, again, I don't know, this can play out many ways, but I could foresee that you actually get a flight to almost the larger ones, a flight to brands, and brands that you trust. So media outlets or channels that you, or individuals that you really trust. And I guess maybe that's what you see a bit, is that, you know, you have, how many podcasts do you have? But then you have some which becomes very, very large.
But then also less binded to traditional media houses, policies and philosophies. So it's more commercial. Anyway, we see some of the same patterns, I would say, spanning across industries, and you work with all kinds of industries. And artificial intelligence is dominating so many different spheres in different ways. We need to make a little jump into what might be more conflicting and more challenging, and that is everything that has to do with our personal data, cybersecurity, security at large. And these days we are experiencing a world on fire. I would almost say it's on fire with the geopolitical challenges, wars and conflicts. And we also see that the sharing of data is included even in military, the military sphere. So OpenAI has lifted its ban on not delivering data into military. So logistics, data analytics, etc., with the Pentagon. So my question to you is, isn't some of the development with AI also red flags and very scary?
Of course. I mean, that's obviously this comes with a lot of risks. And I think, for any company or individual for that sake, I think the awareness of the risks and how you mitigate those and how you think about your data, and also as a company, as McKinsey, when we are now really evolving and I would say really fast tracking to stay at the frontier in leveraging AI internally in order to help our clients in the best way. Our data it's not only that it's proprietary data, it's very confidential. We treat extremely confidential data for our clients and information for our clients. So all the cyber risks related to this I think is hugely important, and of course all the personal information and there's a lot of risks related to it. However, what sometimes this is again a balancing act, because sometimes we also see that some are using all the risks related to AI almost as an excuse to experiment fast enough and to really move fast enough, because we're now in we're in an environment where this is changing, not maybe fundamentally on the trajectory of AI, but all the tools and the technology available is changing by the week or by the month.
Yeah.
It goes on a very rapid pace.
Exponential.
Of course, that's
but
a
would you
discussion
like
on the
just to have
second half of the
to
chessboard.
quote it of that one? Would you have put out a clear red flag for what OpenAI is now doing? I think so. So there is a lot of warfare going on, and if AI becomes a war tool, it might mess up even more how business is actually conducted. And are we able to conduct business in an ethical way at the same time as we progress on the use of AI? It's a very complicated question, and I guess maybe you shouldn't be the one to need to answer it, but I presume you think about it.
No, I would just exactly how this works or will play out related to the Pentagon, etc. I don't really have a strong point of view on the risks related in general to AI, including on security and defense. Of course, that is something that we, as individuals, as leaders, as companies, as nations, need to be extremely aware of and really have a wise and thought through sort of reflection on.
Yeah, and even in just the sphere of cybersecurity as such, I know that the CEO of Telenor ASA has been saying that we are not even close to being aware enough about the risks of cybersecurity, data hacking, and any leader in any position has to invest more in understanding more. How do you help your clients working on this kind of risk assessment, risk awareness, and crisis adaptation?
Yeah, I think maybe less on the crisis adaptation. That's
not your.
That's I think there is more specialized and also some of the cyber. We do also some on cyber defense, but I think more if we think about very practically now in the what are we discussing when we're discussing AI with our clients? It's always the balanced view. I mean, we always look at, these are the opportunities, these are some of the disruption risks, which is a part of the risk, but that's more a business risk. And, these are some of the sort of risk aspects that you need to take into account when it comes to, safeguarding your data, proprietary data, personal information, all of this. So that is always a part, and it should always be a part of that. I just still want to make a case for not pushing. Sometimes it feels, and I've been discussing that with a lot of boards also, is that, our mandate is to, if you as a chair or a board think that your main mandate is to safeguard against risk, I would say the risk of moving too slow, that is also a risk.
Oh, I can buy into that. And then there's no innovation.
Exactly.
So nothing happens. You're all about protection.
Yep.
So that's also risky.
Exactly.
And you be standing still.
Yep.
But it's a little bit interesting and fascinating with your background and what has been your your origin story. Because you, as you said, you were in the military, not for a very long time, for a couple of years you were in the military. And you were taught some principles of leadership, and which is also around risk assessment, of course. But were there any things you learned in the military that you feel are with you and that you brought with you into your leadership?
First of all, and we actually ended up in a bit here in Norway, debate in the media a year ago, where someone, because we had said that McKinsey is one of the best environments for leadership development in the world, which I think, we're ranked in Time for the third year in a row as the best company for future leaders, and The Economist has written. I think we also have some external validation, but only if we look in Norway, it's more than 100 out of our 1,000 alumni, or the people who have worked in McKinsey, have become CEOs, and it's probably 200-300 additional ones who have become executives or in the executive management team. So I do think that we're pretty good at developing leaders. But then I had this on quote in paper, and then someone said, yeah, but wait, the military is actually even better. Why are you saying McKinsey is so good? And the point is, I agree.
But there are some parallels.
There are some parallels. And
the discipline.
I think the military, not necessarily the discipline, but that's probably part of it. But I think there is a lot. So that's point number one. I think there is a lot to learn on leadership in the military. I think particularly the opportunity to lead. For me, 19 years old, getting the opportunity to be, second in command in a platoon of 45 highly unmotivated 25-year-olds. We were for my second year.
You were the youngest.
And actually, just getting that as an opportunity, I think that is great. And there's a parallel to that in McKinsey.
Yeah, because what is it you remember the most from that time when you were a young boy, that you now, in hindsight, think, I learned that's where I learned that lesson?
I think what I learned probably most of was there were some in the military that felt that the distinctions on your shoulder, that was sort of the sufficient to lead in a way. Yeah. So when you had these unmotivated 25-year-olds from NTH at the time, NTNU, who was not very keen at being at this god-forsaken place out in the fjord, but if they pointed, not physically, but if they put their leadership a lot of value to the fact that I'm an officer, so you have to do what I say, versus actually getting to know people, understand what drives them, being just a nice person, being able to have a sense of humor and have compassion when they need that, but at the same time also being strict. And that difference was very, especially
so
towards the end,
that
became very clear actually, that the ones who were not really nice to people, but got them to do what they needed because they had a higher rank, versus actually just being, and I don't think it's a magic formula, but just being a nice person basically, and treating people nicely, but also being clear on what needs to get done.
It's a little bit of combination. I'm soon to release a book about leadership, Brave Leadership. And I make the irony about McKinsey people as the blue suits. I call you the blue suits because I remember my first encounter. But all of you, women and men, and one of my first encounters with you, the blue suits, was when you come into the room and you kind of take over, and everybody has such a huge respect, right? So that and then at that time, it's a few years ago, there was also this myth and secrecy around McKinsey. In my opinion, you've kind of released a little bit of that. You are a more open company. You even share your analysis. How much has that been like a conscious mission? You still wear your blue suits, but the language and the culture has changed, and the way you share with the world has definitely changed, in my opinion. Do you have any philosophy around that? Is that a part of your leadership philosophy?
First of all, we don't necessarily wear the blue suits. For me personally, that's just because I'm very lazy and I hate to shop, and it's very easy. It's like being in the military. It's a parallel. I put on a uniform and it's amazing just to... It's like
it's
Obama,
elegant.
who didn't have to make, spend any mental energy on that. But a lot of my colleagues are not wearing suits anymore. So I think it would be, if you go into the Oslo office now, it would not be necessarily the place of blue suits anymore.
My observation is that McKinsey as a company has become more transparent, more open. Of course, you save the information that it's client sensitive. I'm not talking about that.
No,
but more like the way you speak.
But that was a conscious choice. That was also an important aspect for me in Norway in the last 6 years to change. And I think we've also opened up more as McKinsey globally. But I think again this was quite personal for me, because it felt like when I read about McKinsey or I heard about McKinsey from people who didn't necessarily know anyone in McKinsey, they had this extremely strong impression of what we were about. And some could have respect, some did not have respect.
You were scary guys.
They could be scared or they could be angry because we were like, the capitalism, the what do you call it, fyrster, the dukes of capitalism, which when I contrasted that to the people I knew and had known for a long time in McKinsey and the view from the inside, it was just, it was diametrically opposite almost, because what I have seen, and that is only I have seen for these 20 plus years, is there's individuals with a high drive who want to contribute positively. They have a broad sphere of interest. They are not driven by any ideology, or they are all over the place in terms of backgrounds. They are not from Oslo necessarily.
That's also changed, right?
But that was even the case when I started. I remember taking this course in the US with a lady who was educated a concert pianist. I remember we had a priest in the office. I mean, that's their educational background.
Everybody could need those doctors these days.
But we have doctors, we have engineers, we have lawyers, we have all types of backgrounds, and that was also the case 20 years ago.
But so it's not all about perfection either. Are there any gifts of imperfection in leadership? I know that you sometimes feel that many leaders, they find everything so complex and they make everything so complex. Are there ways that we can simplify a little bit how we think and do? Are there any gifts of not always, it doesn't always have to be 200%?
Yeah, now sometimes I'll get to an answer, because sometimes we make these cartoons or we used to do that, it's some years ago, just a picture to remember a large engagement. We make them together with the clients. We used to do that for some reason. It's like a bauta, it's like a small thing to remember that we would often share if we've worked together with a client for a long time. We would actually share that.
Something to keep.
It's something to keep and remember, and we would make a cartoon. And one of them, from many years ago, has a picture of me in the middle with a Rema 1000 shopping bag, which said, "Det enkle er ofte det beste." The simple stuff, a simple answer is often the best one. And that I still believe in, because I still believe that sometimes we make things too complex.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I'm gonna have that. I'm gonna have that bag.
You can have
I
that
might
bag.
refine it a little bit, so it doesn't have to be a plastic bag, right?
It doesn't have to be a plastic bag. I agree, but I definitely think, and even now, in the AI, and that's why when you ask about the risks, and maybe that's part of it, because obviously this is complex. We should not simplify it too much. It is complex. It is risky, but at the same time, if I really take a step back, it's about setting an aspiration and getting alignment around, where do we actually need to be? Where are things changing, and what's our stance to it? Where will the value come from? That's not a rocket. I mean, it's maybe not straightforward to find the answer, but again, you will have a relatively good understanding where might the big opportunities be, and then you lay a plan and a sequence for how you do it, and you get people along. But it's like it's sometimes you don't move because it sounds like this is so impossible or so complicated. It is not necessarily.
Oh, I like this. Make it simple. And at the when we're wrapping up here at the end, how about you yourself? So, what do you do in your lifestyle to make things simple? You did try.
Wear a blue suit. No.
Right?
Wear a blue suit. Every
yeah,
day.
you wear a blue suit.
But
I've heard, and maybe even seen that you sometimes take off your shoes and you go in the forest, for example. So how do you keep up with your own simplicity? Because I found that very fascinating. That you tell your story yourself. You didn't want to meditate.
I don't take off my shoes. I use jogging shoes, but I mean, for me.
Yeah, so you didn't want to meditate, but you found some connection with something that inspired you.
Yeah, for me, I was through meditation. I think everyone needs to have at least a reflected, sort of be reflective on what takes energy, what brings energy, what you need to, let's say, take care of your mental balance and your energy. And for me, I tried, and sometimes I also try to meditate, but that's many years ago. Since I started on that journey, that was after INSEAD where we started that. But then, I mean, for me, what works in my daily life is I need time in nature, and I really do need that time in nature. So during winter I will go cross-country skiing, but I typically don't like to go with anyone then. I mean, I can go.
This is solitude.
With my wife and kids or friends in the weekends. I'm not crazy on that, but when it comes to, a couple of times per week, I do need solitude. I'm not listening to a podcast or bringing my phone. I actually, will leave my phone at home. Then I'm at peace. If I fall or break something, I will have a bit of an issue, but I don't want to be disturbed because I don't always have that self-discipline. And I think, again, for me, I need a couple of hours at least of that every week. Otherwise, I just feel...
And what does it give you to be connected with nature? That also, I mean, it helps you, of course, in your life. But what does it also do with your brain and the way you think about your surroundings?
Well, I think my one big reflection, which I always talk to my colleagues on, is if you really need to think and you really need to reflect, that is, I mean, it can be going into nature or doing something else that you love. So not being prescriptive of that, but I think that's when you actually get to think on a deeper level. So for me, I define this as part of my work, and I think for me it provides clarity. And I've had countless almost miracles when I can be super stressed going into something and thinking that my to-do list is never ending, I'll never get through this, and then at some point you say, well, actually I'm just going to set this aside and do something else and go into nature.
So both clarity and you get more relaxed, you get energy.
And prioritization. Then I think through the prioritization I get more creative. I find out where could I actually, how can I delegate some of this.
And let's pretend you were actually listening on a podcast when you did that, and there was this podcast, and I had asked you this question at the end: what is brave leadership mean to you? What will you message out to the young listeners of this podcast, the students and the leaders to be? What would be a future fit brave leadership in your opinion?
I think a brave leader is aspirational on behalf of him or herself and the company and what they want to do. I think it's a person that is, I would say, brave in terms of learning and curiosity. So I think you have to embrace that this is going to change super fast. So there's something on being brave and testing and exploring as well. And I think it's a leader who is able also to set a vision and set a purpose and bring people along with him or her, which I think is becoming even more important going forward.
Thank you so much, Frithjof, for this fascinating conversation, very inspirational. Thanks to all listeners also who follow us. Keep doing that. Tune in to Northern Lights podcast here at House 21.
Thanks
a
for
lot.
having me, Bente.